Hello and welcome back to the NEXTET YouTube channel. We are here promoting the March 23rd NEXTET concert, and today we have a guest, Dave Rivello. So Dave, tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a composer, and I'm very thrilled to be coming to be a guest there and to have a couple of my pieces performed, one brand new that I just finished. And besides being a composer, I teach. I'm on the faculty at the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York, where I live. And I did my degree at Eastman many, many years ago with the legend Rayburn Wright. And I was also very fortunate to get to study with composer Bob Brookmeyer. I spent 15 years apprenticing with him. And at the near the end of that time was when I interviewed him and wrote my book, which has been out for a couple of years now, called Bob Brookmeyer in Conversation with Dave Rivello.
Now you have an influence in jazz, or you're primarily a composer with jazz and commercial or jazz and contemporary media. Tell us a bit about that.
My background has always pretty much been in jazz. I grew up kind of as a jazz trumpet player, and my grandfather had a big band on the road in the 1940s. And then one day, I still remember that it was his birthday was on July 4th, and we were having a family picnic and celebrating his birthday. And he was an accordion player and also played piano. And I remember asking him about a melody to a particular jazz standard. And he took a paper plate and he drew a 5-line staff and a treble clef and he wrote the melody out of his head. And I thought, wow, that's the coolest thing ever. And I think when I look back, that's what made me want to be a composer. So from the point of junior high school, when I wrote my first arrangement that the band director helped me with, the only thing I wanted to do was write music the rest of my life.
So tell us more about the Way Back. This is the world premiere. This is the first time anybody's going to get to hear it. Tell us more about it.
I'm really excited about it because, the thing is that there were many of us and composer friends of mine that when the pandemic started, I actually asked about 50 composer friends of mine to just kind of respond to a few questions about how they were doing, if they were creating work, if they were not creating work, where they were at. And it turned out that many of us were all struggling with creating work during that time. And as things have kind of gotten better with the pandemic, I feel like many people are getting back to work. And so for me, this wasn't the first piece back. I wrote a piece for my own ensemble in a collaboration with a modern dance troupe and a videographer that we premiered at the Rochester Fringe Festival this past September. But this piece is pretty close to, just getting me back to working. And so the title, The Way Back, comes from the way back, which I think all of us are trying to find a way back, and maybe to, what our lives will be now. And I don't know that it's the way back to what it was. It sounds weird, but the way back to a new future, a new reality, I'm not sure.
With Microcosms, now this isn't a newer piece, or this isn't a new piece for you. So tell us about that.
It's also a very short piece. And Brian Shaw, who has gone on to become especially incredibly well known as a natural trumpet player, so the natural trumpet, and he's all over the world playing the natural trumpet. But before that, he was a student at Eastman. He played lead trumpet in my own Dave Rivello ensemble, and we've been great friends since he was a student there. And he asked me to write a short piece for him to play. And he's also one of those people that he's a great classical trumpet player, a great jazz trumpet player, a great jazz arranger and composer, and a great teacher. He's one of those people. And so I wrote this piece for Brian, and because he has such great ability and control on the trumpet, I can't remember if it starts on his written high E, like 3 ledger lines, very soft in harmon mute, I think. And it's just something that not that many trumpet players could do. And so he traveled with it and played it around in many colleges for a while. And it's not been played in quite some time. So I'm really excited to hear it again.
That's really exciting. So you also have a book. Where could we find that?
The book is available on Artist Share. So there's different levels of the book, but you get all this back content, including interviews with former students of Brookmeyer's and photos there's a really great series of photos I found because we have his archive at Eastman of his apartment in the 70s in New York City on Second Street in Brooklyn, and just like great pictures of that. sketches in his hand and everything that I could put together in this project. And then on the higher level, the composer participant level, you also get 5 streaming audio lessons with me based on my lessons with Brookmeyer. And in that, I show my homework with his corrections, and I talk through all of that. I talk through his 3-pitch module approach to composition. And so that's the composer participant level. And in that, you also get the book, of course, and you get all this web content. And so it's available at artistshare.com.
Where can we find more of you?
Let's see, there's some, daverevello.com is back in progress. It disappeared for a while. So there, I think there is a link to my book there and a link to my Dave Rivello Ensemble CD called Facing the Mirror. And there's contact info, and so I can guide from there. I have a bunch of things published from by Alfred Publishing for jazz, like grade 3 jazz ensemble for high school and college level players. And then other music of mine is available directly from me.
Thank you so much for giving us the background to your composition career, where you started, and for these pieces. We are so excited to hear them on the March 23rd concert. And thank you for doing this interview.
Hello, everyone. My name is Collin Salmon, and I am here with Dr. Diego Vega of the UNLV Composition Division. We are here to talk about your piece Mambo, which is being premiered at the NEXTET concert on March 23rd. The first question I wanted to ask you, in your notes, you talk about how you have an inspiration for this piece. Can you talk a little bit about that?
The idea here came mostly from the words, right? When, I don't know if people are familiar with Mambo. Mambo is a style of music from Cuba that became very popular in the 50s. In both Cuba and the United States was the party music, the music to dance, the salon music dancing. There's recordings from what we call today the king of Mambo, Damaso Pérez Prado, is a Cuban musician. He composed many pieces. Some of them numbered, like almost classical pieces, Mambo number 1 to number 5. And then the famous Que Rico es Mambo, right? Which is the text that I'm using in my piece. So what I find interesting about Mambo and many other, let's say, dance music in the Afro-Caribbean region is that sometimes the words in those pieces are used as an onomatopoetic, right? It just fulfills a rhythmic function. As opposed, let's say, to the art song German Lied, you know, Schumann or Hugo Wolf, because the point of the text is more how the syllables connect with the group. It's like a syllable, it's like a percussion instrument. The voices of the consonants of those syllables are a percussion instrument. With this text that it says nothing, right?
Yeah.
Mambo, mambo, que rico mambo, 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 que rico es. Means mambo, mambo, how tasty mambo, 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 how tasty it is. That's it.
And so you sort of are thinking of the text rather not as sort of a message, but rather as an instrument.
Exactly. That's exactly right. For my whole life as a Colombian, listening to, let's say, dance music, like, you know, cumbia, or listening to salsa or merengue, or those Afro-Caribbean or Caribbean music that people dance to, and some of those texts always seem to me very funny because they don't say anything, right? And so, but the point that we get when we dance to it and when we sing it is that the text is just an excuse to have a sound to produce with your mouth that goes with the rhythm. And I find that interesting, right? It's a different use of text that is very functional. It's not about the message.
Well, I have one final question for you. It sounds like on a sort of a micro level, we have this very rhythmic piece, but on sort of a larger scale, we have this lyrical line in the melody. How do you balance those out so that one doesn't overdo the other?
Yeah, I mean, the voice, the rhythmic, the piano writing is constantly like rhythmic, and, you know, it has the typical, let's say, subdivisions of Latin jazz, right? There's groups that go over the bar line that feel good, that this shifting of the bass line, shifting of the harmony. But the line, the melodic line works over that really, I think, nicely or well, because it's much more, it's smooth. and it's syncopated and it's rhythmic too. But the difference between this and the original writing is that there's melismas, right? Because I have such little amount of text that I use a lot of melisma. I think between the melisma and the way I smooth out the melody, I think that creates a little bit of the lyrical effect. The melodic contour is absolutely atypical of a real mambo. I come more myself from the tradition of the art song that from mambo, and so the line is much more informed by the lyrical art song, while the piano writing and the rhythm itself is more inspired by the original mambo or Latin jazz.
Yeah, I think also due to the percussive nature of the piano, it can be, you know, sort of that more rhythmic feel versus the voice has a much more easier time singing legato lines. And
that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right, because the piano writing has much less pedal than usual. That I write for piano a lot, but this has less pedal than usual, and it's very specific where I want pedal. And so when the line begins, there's a lot of pedal. There's more pedal in the piano, let's say, than in the introduction or at the end. But still, the rhythmic character continues. That, as you say, more percussive, more rhythmic, and the voice is, on the contrary, smooth and it's a different contour, lyrical.
I'm excited to hear it. Thank you so much, Dr. Vega. That's everything I have for you. And
Thank you,
look
Collin.
forward to hearing your piece.
So John, tell us a bit about yourself.
I worked for a long time as a freelance bassoonist in Los Angeles. And I'm retired from that now, but I'm still composing. And composing for me started out as kind of a hobby, but it was really persistent, hard to shake. And I got more and more involved with it. And I was very lucky that people would ask me to write pieces for them. So I had projects to write for. I went to school at Fresno State, first of all, that's where I grew up. And then I transferred to California Institute of the Arts when it was brand new. And at that school, I was involved with African music. I sang in the choir. I played a little bit of South Indian classical music on the bassoon. And I was having a maybe not so typical bassoon education as well, chamber music and orchestra and stuff like that. And all of those things really convinced me, not in words, but I just absorbed the idea that there was much more to the world's music than I had realized before, and that, of course, it's all connected.
So you have a piece called Suite from an Imaginary Opera. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, maybe it's good to start with where it came from. I was contacted by the oboe professor at Arizona State University, Martin Schuring, who was working on oboe pieces that were based on operas. They're one kind of seam of classical music is opera music adapted for other situations. You know, in the 19th century, in the 18th century even, you couldn't go out and buy the album, you couldn't stream the opera. And so for people to hear the music who couldn't attend the opera, composers and arrangers and musicians made all kinds of versions of these operas. And Martin wanted an English horn piece that would be similar in some way. And he didn't specify how to do it. So for a while I thought, well, maybe I'll pick some opera and make some variations on that. Or, you know, I thought of different ways to meet the requirements. And then somehow I came up with this idea of imagining an opera that didn't exist and writing a piece that extracted music from that non-existent opera. So this piece is like a suite of pieces that come from an opera, except the opera doesn't exist. And one reason the opera is imaginary is that I wanted to do the emotional curve of the piece and of this opera differently from the way a lot of operas happen. So there are many, many operas that start out with cheerful optimism and characters being really happy. And by the end, there's been disaster and, you know, tragedy of one kind or another. And often the main characters are no longer living at the end. And so I thought I wanted to try doing it the other way around, to have an opera imagine an opera that starts in a kind of bleak or even depressed sort of way and gradually works its way to a happier situation, musical situation. I think for the last movement is an apotheosis. This was the kind of movement, kind of music that composers wrote in the Baroque period, especially, that depicts or celebrates the entry of some hero or heroine into heaven. It's like a rising to heaven. And I have no idea what was going on in the story of the opera. I didn't imagine it in any detail what this apotheosis is. And that's something that's up to the audience. And I'm always curious to hear from people about what they experience when they listen.
That'd be a really interesting question to ask our audience afterwards.
Yeah, it's fun to ask that. When I can, I do, because you get more interesting conversations. And sometimes, maybe you've noticed this, that non-musician civilian listeners don't quite know what to say about something they've heard, even though it's affected them very strongly. They may not have language to describe that experience. And so giving a question like, what's in your movie, for people who are visually oriented, that can then spark a conversation that can be pretty interesting.
Do you have any advice for composers who want to compose like this, who want to make an imaginary opera of their own?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things I could say. It would depend on the kind of project the person wanted to do. But I think one of the invitations of opera is to write music that's about human experiences, about kinds of human experiences that we can all recognize. Even if we've never been a king or, a bird catcher or, any of the kinds of characters that are in opera, we recognize what those people go through. They lose somebody and they're tragic. They fall in love. They yearn for something.
So if people want to get in contact with you or hear more of your work, where can they find you?
Well, I have a website, johnsteinmetz.org, so they can come there, and there are snippets of my music on that website, and there's contact information there. And there are also, luckily enough, are quite a few performances that people have done on YouTube that you can find just by putting my name in there. So that's another way.
Thank you so much for talking with me today, and thank you so much for doing this concert. We are so excited to hear your music and see you.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to meet everybody there and to, always to see, okay, what's going to happen.
I am here with Dr. Jennifer Bellor of the UNLV Composition Division. So we are here to talk about your piece entitled Light Awakens. And to start off, can you just describe how you came up with that title?
So I knew that you were going to ask that just now. And to be perfectly honest with you, I really can't remember. I woke up one morning and I just was thinking about how I wanted to, I love the word awakening or awaken. And I wanted to do something with maybe light or dark, or I don't know. And I felt like this whole process of composing the piece was a very new thing for me. And I guess in some ways it was very much like an awakening sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to call it Light Awakens.
So are you saying that you had sort of a personal awakening to this?
I think so, in a way. I mean, when I saw the robotic arm for the first time over the summer, so Phil Joy built it. And when he brought it home, I couldn't help but think how musical it was. The sweeping gestures of the robotic arm and then the sound that it makes. And I was telling him since the summer how much I really wanted to compose something involving this robotic arm, but in a very beautiful and musical way, where it was a part of the ensemble. And then the other instruments I decide to pair with the robotic arm also mimic some of those gestures and sounds. And so like using certain textures, like incorporating, natural harmonics or even artificial harmonics in the violin, wind tones from the flute and, multiphonics, or even having the saxophonist sing some tones through the instrument, I thought would pair really nicely with the sound that the robotic arm makes.
So I like to envision music as sort of the background to like a movie scene or something. Have you ever given thought into this possibly being featured in a film?
I have. Well, I'm planning on producing a music video
Mm.
that will basically premiere this piece. And so after the performance at UNLV, I'm planning on doing that. And so that way I'll be working with the videographer, and we will kind of envision some sort of a narrative in the music video that can go with this. But yes, absolutely. And in fact, I have some ideas beyond this composition where I'd like to even write an opera that somehow ties this in as well. And I always think about visual elements and narratives, and it'll be really cool once the music video is produced to showcase this piece, but also perhaps in a very like abstract or narrative format.
We're going to bring on Phil Joy, who is the engineer behind this robotic masterpiece. You are the engineer behind all of this, correct?
One of the many, yes.
Yes. So I have to ask you, do you have like a musical background, or are you mostly just in the engineering side?
Mostly on the engineering side. All of my music experience is amateur, at least compared to, you know, yours and Jennifer's and the rest of the faculty at UNLV. So I have not studied it professionally, but I know what a BPM is. And as far as I understand, that's what's important for this project.
Yes, that,
Yeah.
that was going to be my next question, is how do you take music and turn it into the mathematical coding of robotics?
Right. So we have several methods that we use to train the robots. So we're not inputting music and having the robots interpret it on their own. We as humans are listening to the music and then helping the robots record the motion that makes sense at the tempo or at the sync that's appropriate for the music. So what we'll be utilizing is a pre-recorded motion for all of the robots that are involved in the production. And we'll be replaying that motion at a certain interval, hopefully without any hiccups. And we'll have to, you know, practice that beforehand and then confirm it again on stage before the production.
The only other questions that I had to do with more of the engineering side of it.
Yeah, so this is the first time that so the robotic arm that we're going to be utilizing for the concert is called the Dexter robotic arm, and it's a low cost, about a $5,000 per robot unit that's primarily 3D printed. It's high accuracy, and it utilizes kind of a complex computing platform called an FPGA, which I won't get into, but that enables it to perform at such a low cost. And it's also 10 to 15 pounds per robot. So we'll be able to carry these things on stage and transport them. Industry robots are usually 50, 60, or 100 pounds. So they're more difficult to transport, and they're also far more expensive and more difficult to program. So the low weight plus the ability to kind of train them by hand is really is kind of critical to our application here. And I think it's the reason why we can get 2 or 3 of these things on stage.
Yeah, I'm super excited to hear it. And so thank you so much, Dr. Bellor and Phil. We are super excited to hear it, and we hope you can all come to the concert that is on March 23rd to hear this wonderful piece.
Like when I like a low, sorry, edit this out.